Good morning, and it's Bible study time at Calvary Baptist Church. We're looking at the last lesson as we've been talking about Elijah living outside the comfort zone, and Elijah certainly did in his lifetime. God called him to be a prophet, and it wasn't just like going down to the street corner and getting on his soapbox and preaching. He really had to do some tough things, and part of it was to confront King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. And so we've talked about that throughout the few weeks that have preceded this. Well, today we're going to look at then in our lives, not only do we need to be obedient to God and get out of our comfort zone and follow, but along the way, it's good that we invest ourselves in someone else, that we mentor someone and help them, because we're not always going to be here. And what about the next generation? I think about Steve Green used to sing, "May all who come behind us find us faithful." And how true that is, that if we are not investing, or if we are not pointing in the right direction and being watchmen, as God has called us to be, then where are we headed in the future? And so we really do stand with that. And it is important that we invest in other people in order that they can continue the work that God has called us to do. So we're going to, first of all, begin in 1 Kings 19, look at verses 19 through 21, and then we'll dive in on over to 2 Kings chapter 2. And you may want to just sit down this afternoon or make that part of your Bible reading this week to read the parts in between from 1 Kings 19 all the way to 2 Kings chapter 2, because then you get a little better perspective of the mentoring that Elijah did with Elisha. They walked together. He had a buddy, Elijah did, and all the things he was doing before. He just felt like he was the only one. He kind of forgot God was with him. And then, so you can kind of get a better picture of that. And then you might even be curious and say, well, let me read a little farther. That'd be good. Why don't you read on then into 2 Kings and see what God really did through the mentored one, Elisha, the prophet. So I'm going to go ahead and begin in there. And Elijah had really gone through a lot in his ministry. We just touched base on a few of the things, but he really had to deal with a lot of things and highs, God providing, knowing God was near, low, having to run from or making himself run from Jezebel and her threat on his life, and then God assuring him and putting him back on the right track. And so that's kind of where we pick up where he was in the south. He was at Mount Horeb, and in 1 Kings 19, beginning of verse 19, it says, Elijah left there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, as he was plowing. 12 team of oxen were in front of him, and he was with the 12th team. Elijah walked by him and threw his mantle over him, and Elisha left the oxen, ran to follow Elijah, and said, "Please let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you." "Go on back," he replied, "for what have I done to you?" So he returned back from following him, took the team of oxen, slaughtered them, and with the oxen's wooden yoke and plow, he cooked the meal and gave it to the people, and they ate. And then he left and followed Elijah and served him. So again, we begin in verse 19. Elijah left there. That was Mount Horeb, where he was and where he had heard the wind and heard the earthquake and heard the fire. And then it wasn't until the still small voice of God spoke to him. And you'll recall last week God said that he needed to anoint a couple of kings that would be instrumental in finally getting away or doing away with Baal worship in Israel. And then God said he also needed to anoint Elisha to follow him, or to be his the one who followed him as a prophet over Israel. And so he left there, and he retraced his steps back the way he came, and he found Elisha, who was plowing, it says. Had 12 teams of oxen in front of him. He was with the 12th teams. He was at the back. He was plowing. There were a lot of others plowing in front of him. We don't really know what to make of that, other than we would say that probably Elisha's family was very rich. They probably had some means to them, and so had a lot of teams in front of him, had a lot going on, and so Elijah knew that God wanted him to anoint Elisha to be his successor. And so on the way, he walked past him, never said a word to him. It wasn't like Jesus calling Matthew and Jesus calling Peter and James and John and Andrew, and he just walked past and said, "Follow me, I'll make you become fishers of men." Here, Elijah just walked by and just threw his mantle over onto Elisha, and Elisha immediately knew exactly what that meant. Now, I believe that Elisha was a man of God to begin with, and actually, I think that he had been seeking God, and what should I do, and what does my life mean, and what do I need to do? And so there he was, and Elijah walked by. He threw the mantle on him, and I would say that is a sign from God, or that is God speaking to you directly. You need to become my prophet. And so he did. He left everything, he walked away, and he began to follow Elijah. And then after he followed him a little ways, he left everything there. And then he followed him a little ways, and then he said, "Please let me go kiss my father and mother, and then I'll follow you." And so Elijah said to Elisha, "Go on back, for what have I done to you?" And he's literally saying to him, "You go ahead," simply because Elisha was willing to drop it all and follow. And so he made that initial step of faith. He started to follow him, and then he said, "It might be good if I just went back and told my parents what I was doing, if I went back and did what I was needing to do." And then some of you might say, "Well, how does that contrast with Luke, where, let me get that in my notes here. Where is that? Gosh, can't even see it, can't find it. Where Jesus, here it is, Luke 9, 61 and 62, where after Jesus in Luke 9:51 said, Luke says that Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. And that wasn't so much as a location as it was a destination, that he set his face to go to be crucified. And so then just a few verses later in Luke 9:61 and 62, the story is told about the man who said, "Let me go back and bury my father." There's a difference there. Elijah had already taken that step of faith and said, "I'm willing to follow you. However, I feel like in order to make sure everything's good and I've cut ties and everything's right, I need to go back and make a celebration out of this." And so that's what he did. Whereas the man in the story with Jesus, he was really putting his discipleship on the back burner. He was really saying, "No, wait a minute, I'm not going to step out in faith here until I've taken care of all my business." And sometimes we just need to step out in faith and prove to God, I'm willing to follow no matter what. We'll be surprised what God will allow us to do if we'll step out in faith and be obedient to him. So don't put it on the back burner. If God calls, step out in faith, and then we'll be surprised what God might allow us to do along the way. Elisha turned this into a celebration. What did he do? He went back, he killed the oxen, he tore up the plow and the yoke, and he built a fire. In the writing of this, you even get the impression that part of this was used as a sacrifice. Part of it was used as an offering to God. He literally went back to pay tribute to God, almost as a thank you for calling him out to be a prophet. And so he did that, but he also did it for the whole community. It was a celebration to say to his family, and he invited the whole area and said, "Look, we're going to have a celebration because God has called me to be his prophet." I think there's a significance out of that. When you share that with your loved ones, and then he was faithful to do what he said he would do. After the celebration was over, he followed Elijah, followed him faithfully. And it says not only did he follow him, but he served him. He served him. He became truly one who was an apprentice, one who wanted to learn, one who would come alongside and be mentored by the one who understood what it was about. So out of that, and I didn't put an outline on the board, but the outline would say, we need to allow others to lead us. We need to allow others to help us to follow God. We shouldn't stand against or shouldn't stand, maybe not against, but in conflict with those who are trying to help us and those who are trying to mentor us and to lead us in the right direction. So not only should we allow people to mentor us, but we should seek who we can mentor as well. It's a good illustration, good story, isn't it, in that? And then we jump on to 2 Kings chapter 2. First of all, we'll look at verses 6 through 11. And Elijah said to him, that's Elijah saying to Elisha, and by the way, again, I'm just going to remind you that those verses, and there's, I think, maybe 2 or 3 chapters in between, you may want to read because it gives you a lot of insight into that relationship between Elijah and Elisha, his prodigy. And so anyway, it says in verses 6 through 11 of chapter 2 of 2 Kings, Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord is sending me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the time has come for Elisha to take over. The time has come for Elijah to be gone. We don't know what Elijah really knew or what he really sensed, but he had a pretty good idea that his days were numbered. That God had impressed upon him that this is it. You've trained your apprentice. You've helped him along the way, and now the time has come for you to move on, and that is move on to heaven. And so Elisha said, when Elijah told him, "I have to go across the Jordan," Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live," which is just kind of covenant type language. It's a common time a statement, as the Lord lives and as you live, showing respect for God and for Elijah. Elisha said, "I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. And 50 men from the sons of the prophets came and stood observing them at a distance, while the two of them stood up by the Jordan. It was not uncommon for a prophet to have many that he was mentoring. There were those who went to this, what they called them the schools of the prophet. As a matter of fact, that's where Jeremiah was. He was at Anathoth, which was a kind of a home base for prophets and for the southern kingdom, for the tribe of Judah. And so it was not uncommon for a prophet to have multiple followers. We know Jesus had 12, didn't he? And so it was not uncommon for a prophet to have multiple people that were prophet apprentices or people who had felt the call of God and they were following this prophet because they wanted to learn of him. We still have it in Orthodox Judaism. People align themselves with rabbis, with good teachers, and in order for them to learn the ways of the scriptures and to be in tune with the Spirit of God. So 50 men from the sons of the prophets came and stood observing them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan, it says in verse 7. And then Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water. So here's the city of Jordan. It's kind of on at the top of like a rolling hill, or kind of a gradually declining plain that goes down to the Jordan Valley. And so if you were in Jericho, you can probably see down there to that. And so they stood at the outskirts of Jericho, and they were watching as the two prophets, Elijah and his the one he is mentoring, Elisha, go to the Jordan. And then what happens when they get to the Jordan? Elijah takes his mantle, his cloak, or his outer robe, rolls it up, he strikes the Jordan River, and guess what it does? It parts, and they walk across on dry ground. Now, I've been to the Jordan River. I don't think that's, I don't know about that, but I believe that it was the authority of God that allowed that to happen. And it was significant. I think they could have waded across. I think it wouldn't have been a problem either way. But the significance of this, we're going to see in just a little bit of how that works. So then it says in verse 9, and when they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what can I do for you before I am taken from you? So Elisha answered, tell me, or let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit. And sometimes the King James says a double portion. And so, oh boy, people get all excited about, he got twice as much as what Elijah has, or Elijah had. Well, it probably really means what this says, 2 shares. In other words, as his son is a prophet, as his kind of firstborn or his main mentor or mentoree, whatever, then he is just asking for him to receive what a firstborn would receive, an inheritance. So basically, he's saying to him, give me the firstborn inheritance. Give me the blessing so I can receive 2 shares rather than a single share. Give me, or allow God to do that, if you would, please. And so it says in verse 10, Elijah replied, you have asked for something difficult. In other words, he's saying, I don't really know that's in my power. But he says, if you see me being taken from you, you will have it. If not, you won't. And as they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire. Envision that one, will you? A chariot of fire with horses of fire. Remember, fire's been kind of instrumental in the ministry of Elijah. He asked God to bring down fire upon the sacrifice on Mount Carmel. It was a fire that consumed when he was in the south, and he was waiting for God to speak. But God wasn't in the fire, but God was in the still small voice. But now he sees this fire, and he recognizes that God is in this. So chariot of fire with horses of fire suddenly appeared and separated the 2 of them. And then Elijah went up into heaven in the whirlwind. And I like it in the fact that it says it was the whirlwind. Remember, Elijah has been standing against the false god Baal, who was the god of the weather, or the god of provision when it came to weather things. And he's been standing against this god who supposedly those who worship Baal think is the one who takes care of the weather and takes care of all that kind of things that are associated with that. And yet, look, it was God who controlled the whirlwind, wasn't it? It was not Baal. It was not a false god. It was God, the true God, who controlled the whirlwind. And so, of course, Elijah said to Elisha, if you see me go, then you'll receive the blessing. And of course, he saw it, didn't he? Now, we know that he saw it. We don't know if the sons of the prophets who were still at the outskirts of Jericho saw it too, because it doesn't tell us that. It's quite evident, or it's quite possible that they did, even though they were on the other side of the Jordan. It's possible that they saw it. It's possible that they saw all this going on. God's like that. He doesn't do a lot in secret. He does things out in public where people can testify and people can say that it happened. And so we have the record here in 2 Kings about what happened with Elijah. So the whirlwind came. God is the God over the wind, not Baal. And then he was taken up into heaven. And then we jump to the last passage, which is verses 12 through 14 of 2 Kings 2. And in verse 12, it says, as Elisha watched, he kept crying out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. And when he could see him no longer, he took hold of his own clothes, tore them in 2, and he picked up the mantle that had fallen off of Elijah when the whirlwind took him up. And he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan, and he took the mantle Elijah had dropped, and he struck the water. And he said, where is the Lord God of Elijah? He asked. And he struck the water himself, and it parted to the right and the left, and Elisha crossed over. So the significance of Elijah striking the water when they went across to the east side of the Jordan I believe, was so that when Elisha came back, it was God's affirmation that he had granted the blessing to him. He could take Elijah's man, not that there's anything significant about his robe or about his cloak or about his mantle, nothing significant about that other than it shows symbolically that the power of God was now resting on Elisha, the prophet. And so he struck the water with it, and it did exactly as it had done the time before. Now, I'm not going to be one of these people who says, well, scientifically, they just knew where to walk. You know, it was dried up. It's like, oh, baloney. Don't feed me that nonsense. I believe in a God who's big enough to do whatever. And he did that. It was all visible. They saw it. And I believe when Elisha, when he got back to Jerusalem to these itinerant prophets who were in training, following him and Elijah to begin with, I think they saw it and they said, yep, this is the guy. You know, the old guy's gone. Here's the new guy. And he's the one we need to follow. Now, he's the one we need to learn from. He's now the master, and we need to become the mentored. We need to become trainees. And so I think that was just a great, significant thing for him to see and know. Well, so out of that, the lesson we can learn is that, you know, we do need to pass things along. We do need to make sure that there are those behind us who will follow and do what we have done. We need to train. We need to mentor. We need to help others to know what we need to do in order for ministry to continue. You know, in God's economy, God can always raise up someone, and he will. No leader is irreplaceable. We've gone through lots of leadership loss in our church, and we've had lots of times when people have gone to be with the Lord. Perhaps the hardest for me was when some of those old guys who were just good, solid men, good leaders, deacons in the past who have gone before us. That was hard for me to lose them because they had been rocks in this church. It was hard for me when the Lord called Don Beavers home because he was instrumental in so many things. And so it's up to us to make sure that the ministry continues in our church. It's up to us to make sure that we do our part, that we seek the Lord, that we train up others, that we not only understand what is right and what's supposed to be, but we help others learn that as well. We should be ready to continue to serve in every situation so effective ministry can continue. You know, that old saying, next man up, you know, and they use that a lot in war. And if you're on the front line and you go down, next man up needs to step in there and do it. Sports teams talk about that a lot, that if someone gets hurt or someone gets injured, next man up needs to be the one to bring it through. I remember back when the Royals were good in the 70s and even into the mid 80s, George Brett used to talk about that kind of thing a lot, that he felt like everyone on the team had that mindset that the guy before you may have struck out, so now it's up to you. You better get out there and do something. And he always took that to heart, and that's why George was, you know, over a 300 lifetime hitter, hit a lot of home runs, you know, why they used to have those bumper stickers in Kansas City in the 80s that said George Brett for president, you know, because he was serious about the game and he played well. So some of y'all might get that. Some of y'all maybe too young. Anyway, so in the church we need that because God's power is always going to be at work. We need to be involved with him where he's working and what he's doing. So next week we get a new unit. I'll tell you about it next week. And it's out of 1 John, which is kind of fresh on our minds because we did January Bible study last winter out of 1 John. So God bless y'all and have a blessed day. Bye-bye.